Dana, you're welcome to begin.
Great, thank you, Vita. Welcome to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Dana Breckwald. I am the president of the Northern California chapter of EERI. Just want to say a couple of things before we get going on our webinar. The first one is obviously that this has been a really crazy year, and our chapter this year has not looked the same as it has in years past, for those of you who have been involved with our chapter for a while. On one hand, we haven't been able to see each other in person, so we haven't gotten our normal in-person networking. And this is really the first year I can remember that we haven't had a really fantastic holiday party. But on the other hand, we've been able to really expand our reach with our online offerings that we've done this year, including this one. We have speakers from all over the world, which we haven't had before, and a far bigger audience through increased partnership with EERI National, which has been advertising our events. I think Vita said that we have over 300 people registered for this webinar today, which we obviously would never get if this was an in-person event. We're really hoping that next year we can have in-person events again at some point. This is just a reminder that we still do need your support. Please remember to renew your Northern California chapter membership or join if you're not currently a member. You don't even have to be local. You can support our local chapter even if you're elsewhere in the country or the world. And we're really hoping that next year we'll continue to host online events like this one. And if we're able to be in person at some point, I think it's probably going to be the best holiday party we have ever had. Also, just the end of the year is rapidly approaching, hard to believe. My term as president of this chapter is ending at the end of this year. This is definitely not how I plan to end my term, but I'm really looking forward to serving one more year as past president and passing the baton along to Volkan Sevljan, who's starting in January. We're preparing our elections right now, and we have two amazing candidates on the docket for you. So stay tuned for ballots in your inbox very shortly. And then lastly, in lieu of a party this year, we'll be sending out an end of the year email to recap what's been going on, who's joining the board, who's leaving the board, and everything that we've been up to this year and our plans for next year. So thanks again for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to talking to our panelists here.
Okay, my name is Bruce Mason. I am one of the board members of the Northern California chapter. I will be the first moderator for today's program. As you know, we have a very exciting program today because we're going to see some European perspectives on what happens when an earthquake occurs during a pandemic. We are seeking a lot of audience participation today, and we've reserved a significant amount of time at the end of our program to hear your questions that you can pose to the panelists. I will go over the format of today's program. We're going to have two panels. The first panel will give a PowerPoint presentation for about 12 minutes. Then I will pose several questions to the panel, during which time you, the audience, can use the chat feature to be able to pose your questions. Then we will have the second panel, and they will give a 12-minute PowerPoint presentation. And again, I will present several questions to them, during which time you, the audience, can prepare your questions as well. Then I will turn control of the meeting over to our second moderator, Rob Olshansky. He is a fellow board member of the Northern California chapter. He will be compiling your questions that he will receive via the chat, and then he will select several of those questions to pose to the panel. Unfortunately, we don't anticipate that we'll be able to cover all of your questions from the audience, but Rob will try to categorize them. He will put the questions into several different buckets and then perhaps select one from each of the buckets so we have a fair representation. We've allotted about 25 minutes for the audience questions to the panelists, and that will occur later in our program. Now, what I'd like to do is move on to our first panel, and this one deals with how earthquakes can increase the numbers of virus cases using the country of Portugal as a case study. This presentation is going to be taken, or be a basis of it, is from an article that appeared in the EERI journal Earthquake Spectra recently. There are two members in this panel. The first is Vitor Silva. He's of the Global Earthquake Model Foundation, and he's also a professor at University Fernando Pessoa in Italy. He will be joined with Nicole Paul of the Global Earthquake Model Foundation in Italy, and previously Nicole worked in risk modeling in San Francisco, California. Let's welcome Vitor and Nicole.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. So we're excited to present here on our findings from the paper, Potential Impact of Earthquakes During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And so I'm going to start off speaking, and then we'll also switch off with Vitor. So really the motivation for this is to acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic has been affecting all of us for the better part of 2020 or 2019, and is likely to continue for many months to come. And in this time frame, natural hazards have already occurred, but are also likely to occur in the future. And so we hope with this study that we can look at what the potential scale of those impacts are, and to help different decision makers prepare for those. And so we started our study by looking at some past instances of natural hazards and disease outbreaks. And so there's a few findings that we have from that. And one of those is that earthquakes themselves can disrupt the natural environment. And that can bring animals in closer contact with human populations and spread disease. And this was the case in 1994 in Western India, which had an outbreak of the plague as rodent populations were disrupted and came closer to humans. Additionally, earthquakes can cause damage and injuries, and that can overwhelm existing systems. And in Haiti in 2010, there was a devastating earthquake. And unfortunately, some of the international aid workers that came over weren't properly screened for different potential diseases that Haiti would be susceptible to. But the severity of that outbreak was greatly influenced by the fact that the healthcare and especially the sanitation systems were severely damaged by that earthquake. And then also there's natural hazards of any sort can cause displacement, which can lead to subsequent crowding, whether it's people moving to be with family members or friends, or whether it's in emergency shelters. And this is particularly notable for instances where there's a low baseline vaccination rate, which unfortunately would be the case for coronavirus, but is also true if there's poor sanitation conditions in these shelters. And that was the case in the Philippines after the Mount Pinatubo eruption, where there was a subsequent measles outbreak, as well as more recently in Spain with the Lorca earthquake and chickenpox. So since the COVID-19 pandemic began, there have been a few notable earthquakes, and so I just wanted to list a brief timeline of those. And I know we have other panelists from Croatia, and so they'll speak specifically about their experience following the Zagreb earthquake. But more recently, there has also been the earthquake that affected Turkey and Greece. While this is still unfolding, I did want to note a few findings we already have. And so this is a case where there is a significant displaced population. Unfortunately, the earthquake was quite close to a highly populated area. And so that means that people did temporarily lose their homes and are staying in tents. And this is from the literature review we did, if people are displaced, they become quite susceptible to potential disease outbreak. And so this would be a potential concern. There was also additionally 5 of 25 of the rescue workers were actually tested positive following this event. And there's a photo there where there wasn't necessarily safety precautions taken into account, but then it was also essential rescue work that was being done. In the rapid assessment report that the Turkish version of Doctors Without Borders put out, they did mention that they were distributing hygiene kits to the displaced and vulnerable populations, but there was also a note that there was still a need for some additional resources, such as masks, to be distributed. And they were also working on some more outreach to the significant refugee population that exists in Turkey, which might be less easily able to navigate some of the safety measures that are in place. So I'm going to switch to Vitor, who will discuss a bit about the Portugal study that we did in this paper. So go ahead, Vitor.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, so for this part, I would like just to show how some numerical models were used to try to simulate what we can expect if an earthquake strikes a particular region. This entire work was actually a request from, initially a request from the Italian Civil Protection. So basically one of our colleagues asked us, you know, what can you do? Can you highlight places in the world where might be a particular concern? And are we able to try to predict what can happen if a destructive event happens in a given region? So basically what we try to do is to pick up a few earthquake scenarios, because usually scenarios to single events are a little bit easier to try to communicate to audiences without a technical background. We also define a few transmissibility cases, and then we did some simulations of possible scenarios. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. So, so for this particular case for Portugal, basically we tested 2 scenarios, and these are very typical from to do this in Portugal. Usually we have something of moderate magnitude very close to the capital, Lisbon, you can see over there, and then also a very large magnitude offshore of Portugal, very similar to the well-known 1755 earthquake. So very large magnitude, but a large distance. If you go to the next slide. So we obviously had to collect a lot of information, and one of the reasons we picked up Portugal was because we had already very detailed information about the building stock. So for this earthquake scenarios, we had information about location of buildings, building classes, occupants, the type of material, and so on. And we also built some tools to basically collect automatically information about the COVID-19 cases at the municipality level and throughout Portugal. So this is just some results. For example, using OpenQuake, the OpenQuake engine, we have estimated how much would be the population that would be displaced. So basically the population that would be homeless, and we also estimated the population that would be injured. And this is quite important because this is a portion of the population that is going to be particularly vulnerable to infection, because basically there's a collapse of the safety measures. Maybe some people will be put in shelters, as Nicole was presenting before. So as history has told us, this part of the population is going to be particularly vulnerable. For this earthquake scenario, we can see that the impact is very localized around the capital of the country. If you go to the next one. We'll see that now for this large event, we have basically widespread damage, and we have a huge proportion of the population being affected in the capital, but also in the south. In the south, for example, is particularly important for the country because of tourism. Go to the next one. So then what we did was to try to understand how the epidemic works. So basically we have what we call the effective reproduction number, which tell us if this person has been affected, what's the likelihood that this person is going to affect another person, is going to infect another person. And do we usually have a person infecting many people, so the RT is above 1, or is it lower than 1? We didn't have enough information to understand how this parameter changes after an event, because this study was done at the beginning of the pandemic. Perhaps now, with data from Turkey, from Greece, from Mexico, we might be able to constrain this RT value a little bit better. But we assume two cases, the optimistic and the pessimistic. The optimistic, we use the RT number right after the lockdown in Portugal, which was about 2.5, okay? And the pessimistic, we assume the highest RT value that was observed in Portugal, which was basically around March, when basically no safety measures were being adopted by the population, and also the healthcare system was not ready yet. So these are just some simulations that I would like to show. We have the onshore event on the left, and we have the offshore event on the right. You can see many curves, many simulations, because we have to propagate a wide spectrum of uncertainties. Uncertainties both from the earthquake scenario, because we have uncertainty on the ground shaking, on the fragility, but also uncertainty on the propagation of the virus, because these factors is reproduction numbers. They can change a lot throughout time. And we used a Markov chain, a Monte Carlo simulation, in order to propagate all these uncertainties. You can see that there's a huge difference between case A and case B. Case A being the optimistic case, where basically the population is well prepared and safety measures are followed, and case B being the pessimistic, where we have much higher transmission rates. I would like now just to show how this is, we can go to the next one. I would like just to show how this is affecting some parts of the country. So for example, our results indicate that if the government takes the right measures right after the event, then the impact is very localized, okay? We can see that basically for the smaller earthquake and proper measures, the infection, increase in the number of infections is relatively small and very contained around Lisbon. On the case B, on the pessimistic case, we can see that not just we have higher increase in the number of cases around Lisbon, but also it propagates to the next region of the country, despite the fact that this region was not that affected by the earthquake. If we now go to the large event, the event that basically affected the southwest of the country, we can see that even if proper measures are adopted from the beginning, we still expect a relatively large increase in the number of cases in the country. If we go now to the last case, case B, we can see that this is a very dramatic case in which we see increases in the number of cases above 60% across all the regions, which obviously is quite concerning. If we move just now to the values in terms of fatalities. So fatalities were estimated just basically as a percentage of the people infected. And we consider a 4.3% mortality rate, which is what was observed in Portugal. But this is basically for an healthcare system which is quite stable, which after an event that was going to affect thousands of people in Portugal, that was probably not going to be the case. So we also considered a mortality rate of 11.5%. For the onshore event, we can see that the impact is quite limited, but we can see that for the offshore event of large magnitude, the additional fatalities due to COVID-19 would be basically 1/3 of the fatalities due to structural collapses. This is it from the event, from the scenarios that I wanted to show. Now, Nicole will continue with something much more at the global scale.
Thanks. So we also wanted to zoom out from Portugal and take a look globally to see which countries might benefit the most by preparing in advance for augmenting their emergency plans for COVID. And so we're highlighting a few of those here. I do want to note that this is the data from our paper, which is timestamped of July 2nd. And so it might look a little bit different if we were to plot it again today. But in this case, we're looking at the COVID cases per capita and crossing that with seismic hazard. But if we were instead to cross that with seismic risk by looking at also the exposure and the vulnerability of these areas, we can actually zoom into certain urban areas that might be of particular concern or might especially benefit. But for this, we kind of have to zoom in a little bit further. And so here is Europe, again, timestamp for July 2nd for cases. And so we can see that the Balkan region, as well as Turkey and Central Asia, might be areas that might particularly, as of July, benefit by preparing in advance some plans for COVID along with their existing earthquake emergency plans. Also, we can take a look at the Americas. And so here we can see San Francisco and Los Angeles come up highlighted, as well as Central America and Chile, Ecuador, and Peru, the areas that might particularly benefit from augmenting their emergency plans. But I did want to note, because all of that data was from July 2nd, the situation has changed a bit around the world for COVID-19. As compared with July 2nd, the cases in Europe have certainly increased quite a lot, but we do see quite high cases around the world. And sorry to bring up more anxiety with red maps for everyone. But when we did the study with Portugal, at the time that we did that study, the share of the population that had COVID was about 1 in 330. And so now it's currently about 1 in 44. And so that can make it a lot more challenging to prevent spread of COVID if an event of any type were to occur. And then, just since this is the EERI Northern California chapter, I did want to highlight a few urban areas in California, just to show what the situation is like there. And so in Los Angeles, it's about 1 in 30 people, whereas in the Bay Area, it's about 1 in 60. So, you know, fairly high base rates of infection, and definitely considering in case another event were to occur. So that's all the slides we had for today, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you for listening to us.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. Now, I would like for remind the audience, please type your questions in the chat box, please. I'll ask several questions that came to mind seeing your presentation. First is, I wonder, as you may know, there's been much in the news with regard to a vaccine. Have you incorporated this type of aspect into any of your modeling? In other words, a vaccine that could actually inhibit the spread of the disease.
Maybe I can provide some information to that. The answer is no, Bruce. And in fact, I have to say that, for example, the epidemiological model that we use to propagate the spread of the virus basically just assumes that the entire population can be infected. Okay. So basically, if we were to assume that now a certain share of the population were to become immune, then obviously we would have to change the simulation. It's something that can be incorporated, and perhaps it's actually something that can be used to understand, you know, the places where we should start vaccinating, because obviously resources will be limited at the beginning. But when we did this, the vaccine was something that we were seeing, you know, way far in the horizon.
No, I appreciate that. I realize this is pioneering work, very rapid, and the situation is evolving. Next question I have is, how would you envision government decision makers using your model? For example, would you envision them running a specific model, perhaps for their country or their region, or should they be drawing just general conclusions from the studies you've already done? How would you envision that, please?
Yeah, so at this stage, I think many different government decision makers have already tried to incorporate the current COVID-19 situation into any of their disaster emergency plans. And I think we've seen that because there's been events that have occurred. So I think that's already being thought through. But we do hope, and as Vitor mentioned, that the Portugal scenario study helps to think through and have an estimate of potential numbers that might be worth preparing for. So in terms of, for example, we need to think about sheltering differently, and this has already started to happen, but rather than a large gymnasium full of people, we need to ensure that there's appropriate distancing and potentially quite isolated or separated shelters. And so to have a view of the percentage of the population that could be affected will be helpful in planning for that and ensuring that there's enough accommodations. And then the other thing that we're hoping that government decision makers could take from our study is using those bivariate maps that are crossing seismic hazard or risk with COVID cases. Obviously, those are a bit time-stamped, but I think that can help kind of zoom in on certain areas where there's the most benefit from making these preparations in advance.
Okay, very good, thank you. On one of your graphics, there seems to be a big difference with regard to the so-called well-prepared versus the ill-prepared scenarios. Could you give an opinion with regard to how you view other countries in Europe? In other words, for Portugal, would you consider that to be well-prepared or ill-prepared? I know this is a tough question, but just what would be your opinion?
Well, it is a tough question, Bruce, but I'm going to have to say that I think, unfortunately, we are probably on the ill-prepared side for various reasons. Maybe I will just mention two. One is because lack of resources, not just nationally, but also globally. Because on one side, yes, maybe there was some lack of funds at the beginning, but there was also a shortage of ventilators and masks at the global scale initially. So I think Portugal has been basically reacting to the situation as opposed to trying to predict what we should be doing. And I wanted to highlight, as Nicole was presenting, and I was looking once again at the map, I just noticed that basically all the events that were mentioned at the beginning, okay, are highlighted as very basically high risk and also high COVID, let's say, risk as well. On the map that Nicole showed. So we can see Izmir, we can see, for example, the regions around Mexico, and also a few places in Europe. So, those are actually maps that are indicating, look, something might happen here, so perhaps we should try to prepare. I have to say also, Bruce, that part of me wants to say that perhaps it's almost a little bit too late, because it's not like a lot of these countries have resources to spare. And a study like this might make them, oh, now I'm going to spend these funds because I just saw this study. I feel like a lot of the countries are basically on their limit and trying to react as much as possible. At this stage, maybe I have to say that I could see some of these tools that we're presenting here, also something that can be used in the future, because it is probably unrealistic for us to believe that this is going to be the last pandemic.
Okay. Could you venture any opinion with regard to how you perceive the United States with regard to these scenarios? In other words, well-prepared versus ill-prepared.
Sure. So since I'm Californian, I'll discuss California, and I know it's the Northern California chapter. But I think to an extent, we can actually infer how California would respond to an earthquake based on how California dealt with the wildfires that recently happened during COVID. And I actually happened to be based out of California during that time. And so I do recall some of the messaging that I got from different, the mayor and so on. And, I remember the go-to bag, and now we're adding masks and disinfectant to the go-to bag, for example. And I know there were some changes to how shelters were handled for that. But I should mention with California, compared to many countries in the world, we do have a less vulnerable housing stock in terms of how vulnerable housing might be to earthquakes. And some of that's a benefit of having many frequent earthquakes that we've learned from, and being a bit more new construction in general, especially compared to Europe. And so we do have that going for us. On the other hand, California has an ongoing housing crisis. And so in terms of if there were a large number of people displaced, I think it would be quite hard for California to cope finding, especially isolated accommodation for individuals. And so California may need to get a little creative about that. To an extent, we've already seen that in terms of how San Francisco and some other parts of California were trying to shelter homeless populations in vacant hotels, for example. It's not necessarily a cost-effective solution, but I guess overall, I would say it's wholly dependent on the size of the population displaced. I think if it's a moderate to low number of people displaced, I think California is actually quite well prepared. California has been on a semi-lockdown and having a mask mandate for quite a while now. And at least in my experience, I've noticed that people have been respecting that. But of course, if it gets larger scale, it's going to be hard for anywhere to cope.
Thank you very much. Our time for panel one is now concluded. What I'd like to do is move on to our second panel discussion. This panel will deal with firsthand eyewitness accounts of the earthquake that occurred in March that affected Zagreb, Croatia. This earthquake was the strongest one to affect that city over the last 100 years. About 2,000 buildings were rendered unusable, many of them historic, and about 30 people were injured in this earthquake. This panel also has two members. The first one is Nenad Bjelic. He's a researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Switzerland. He received a doctorate in structural engineering from Stanford University in California. Joining him is Josip Atalic. He is a practicing civil engineer, and he leads a team of experts that assesses seismic risk for the Croatian government. Let's welcome Nenad and Josip, please. Go ahead.
You can. Hello to everybody. You can see my screen. You can see my screen now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Bruce, thank you for invitation. You gave me 2 extra minutes to say something about Zagreb, Croatia, about my beautiful country. I made 10 slides, so I have to hurry a bit. I will use academic run and gun style and try to tell as much as I can, and in discussion we can talk about it, some details. I'm Josip Atalic. I'm associate professor on the University of Zagreb, Faculty of Civil Engineering, and together with Nenad, we will talk about experience in Zagreb, but we have a bunch of other colleagues who are working on earthquakes in Croatia with us. We are some kind of special forces for special earthquake task in Croatia, are very close to practitioners, but reflects that we are writing a minimum scientific papers, and that's okay. You introduced me like a Croatian chamber. For those you don't know, Modric, Kukoc, Petrovic, Miocic, Krokap, of course, Nikola Tesla. We are here in Europe, southeast, very earthquake-prone region, just across the sea from Italy on the beautiful coast. Many of you surely know the city of Dubrovnik right here. We are keeping this beautiful place from 7th century, fighting many wars in history with everybody, and therefore we are very small in population, only 4 million. The most beautiful places usually is most riskiest one. Not just from war, but also from earthquakes. I think all Californians agree with me. We had made many earthquakes in history, and one of them devastated city Saska called Atlantis on the Adriatic coast. Another one heavily destroyed Dubrovnik 1667. And this around Dubrovnik, we had highest PGA, 0.38 for a 475 years return period on bedrock. Another red spot is here in Zagreb. It's 0.26 in the city center, and with several faults just few kilometers from the city, and several earthquakes in the history. But only one earthquake is called a Big Zagreb earthquake. It happened 1880. It was 6.2, with huge financial losses. Almost every building was damage with large immigration. Winter was coming in that period, and after that earthquake, post-earthquake reconstruction of historic center made city center of Zagreb like it is today. You can see some pictures from the Zagreb, and after Second World War, Zagreb became capital of Croatia, one of the youngest metropolises and one of the oldest European cities, because Zagreb Archaeodies was celebrating 900 years, few years ago, founded in 11th century. Today, Zagreb is an administrative, cultural, scientific, economic center with parliament, government, president, all ministries, everything is inside. We have over 20% of all population of Croatia, 35% GDP, many students, and in general, to conclude, a relatively high hazard, high exposure, and high vulnerability. Just to conclude this big picture, we in Croatia build houses to last forever. It's in our mindset. And we have very aged buildings stored with mostly in no code or low code. You can see some data. Initially for Croatia, we have poor maintenance and massive illegal construction. And in general, we have big problems about seismic risk awareness. We successfully ignore many screaming data like 2 national assessments with a specific scenario with city of Zagreb. And they clearly show that historic center of Zagreb is endangered. Almost all country is in red. And our friends for GEM also presented some serious warning for Croatia. But Croatia is a very specific country with no funds, and several ministries are tackling about earthquake, but we have serious problem to solve these problems. And this is official statement that seismic risk in Croatia is very high, potential disaster consequences are unacceptable in relation to country capacities. And all this global picture, earthquake struck Zagreb, it were 5.5, like you said, and this was epicenter. This is the historic center of Zagreb with many aftershocks, and you can see some general data here on slide. There is some of the records just for show. We did some spectrum analysis, early arriving pulse, later arriving pulse, but Nedad could say something later in the questions if you are interested about that. I will focus on impacts, where we were very lucky because day before earthquake, it was proclaimed a lockdown and many people went outside of the city. You can see only one fatality, but very strong psychological shock and panic among citizens and widespread damage. This financial loss is far exceeding expectations for an event on that side. We are expecting 6.5 Richter scale in Zagreb. And you can see some few pictures about churches. Most of churches are damaged. You can see hospitals, most of them are built in a period of big Zagreb earthquake before more than 150 years ago. And university, we have a very old university, 350 years, and this building, this main building of our university is 160 years old. This also related to the most government buildings, parliament is even older, and all the ministries. To skip to some typical damage, they are most related to roofs, chimneys, gable walls, almost all unreinforced masonry buildings. Most of these buildings are wounded from inside, and if you walk Zagreb today, you couldn't see any damages from the outside. And these pictures are from outside the city, near the epicenter, where damage on houses is on these, mostly on these illegal ones I talked before. I have described the system, and volunteers in our country saved the situation regard to the damage assessment with huge sacrifice, exposure during pandemics, neglecting their work, and consultation with the citizens. And actually you can see some structure of the improvised system organization with headquarters, some experts who were calling around the Europe and world. We called Vitor also, some city-state offices and 500 engineers on the field. Foundation of this structure was on few studies. We did it before with the City Office of Emergency Management, some knowledge transfer from EU project Matilda, and some many exercises. We did it with intervention forces and especially Albania mission last year. But in all this process, only 20 people were trained, and on the first day of post-earthquake damage assessment, we have to do many improvisation based on that experience. Second day, we did some adjustment related to the observed damage, some feedback from the field. And second week, we were totally online. Special help was a WhatsApp group where we identified the typical damages, and they are some kind of leveled up on the map. Equipment, we were city office secured equipment first day, and after we had numerous donations. Regard to the preparedness phase, we were really good equipped, and for assessment and regard to the COVID-19, all masks, gloves, disinfectants, and everything else. And we had special COVID instruction for experts. Wear the mask, make the distance, open the windows, maximum 10 minutes in a room, and extra. We didn't have any official forms. We used unofficial forms, so very similar to Italian ADES. We adopted some features for local building stock, and we use it only first 2 days. Third day, we already programmed the mobile application for the field surveys, and also motivated by the COVID to avoid unnecessary contacts. You can see some pictures from this. I have to mention that during the assessment, many people lied about COVID infection and endangered our experts. Therefore, we paused the assessment for 5 days to make some adjustments. You can see marks on a sick or self-isolated person in our application. We have a problem with experienced experts. They were very afraid to go on assessment, and we have problem with many specialists who are unable to come to Zagreb because the lockdown. This picture down is total number of affected people and there is the time we did all this damage assessment. These numbers are much smaller than today. Today we have 20,000 people infected. This is maybe better show where we new affected in Zagreb is blue line, and Croatia is the red one. And you can see the time of the lockdown this day before earthquake, and numbers are growing in all Croatia, but Zagreb was decreasing. That was very comforting for us because in that time COVID was Godzilla. Everybody was afraid of it, and now people are very relaxed. It's totally different mindset. COVID is like a pet, and regard to the people is dying every day. After the damage assessment, we serologically tested 150 experts, and only 3 of them was positive. And all analysis of our epidemiologists said that we can't connect engineer with the spread of pandemic, what was very comforting for us. Some others unexpected difficulties. We had a double report inspection refresh. You can see 40,000 regard to 20,000 buildings. Some reactions of people, they are not familiar with the system, with inspection. They are insisted to stay at home. We have had problems with media, with protective equipment on market, closed borders, like I said before, and especially with the databases, because all city or state decisions were laying on that database. Final results is up here. We had about 5% unusable and 20% of temporarily usable building. And this is some pictures on the end, heat maps that all prove the seismic risk analysis. I showed it on the beginning of my presentation. And you can see some 3D models, and this is some for strategic decisions. For the end, I just to say, have to mention some other activities. We have to make many cookbooks because we have a low level of knowledge of our experts and this specific field of traditional structure, and many educations after earthquake that we will conclude with some conference. From other activities, I have to mention some assessment of reconstruction cost. You have this is in billions, and we did for World Bank also. We made new laws, new regulation, many new things after earthquakes. To conclude, this was small slap lesson for Croatia. Small earthquake. Key is continuous raising and maintaining seismic risk awareness to all stakeholders. Key is to prepare as many procedures as we can and continuous fight with earthquakes through investments, etc. Preparedness also, like Vitor said, we had minimal preparedness for COVID, but in Croatia, on Balkans, we are very good in improvisation. We are very used to it. Also, we had to deal with scenes from the past, and earthquakes are revealing all the scenes, and it's complicated to solve them after, since inside the structural engineering. And for us, only solution is some kind of platform, what we don't have in Croatia. I have to mention on the end, integrity, honor, pride, respect of the structural engineer, and they are feeling like doctors, like they are saving lives. And it's very nice to see in that time. And on the end, we already began to forget earthquakes. COVID is dominating the media space, and seismic risk is decreasing. And in Croatia, we are not ready for new earthquake or earthquakes in some other city. Therefore, for the end, I will invite you to conference. We are an organization on 1 year of after the earthquake with the motto Shake Zagreb with knowledge, and Vitor is one of the invited speakers, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you all for attention, and we are ready for the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. You covered a lot of material. I will ask several questions, and I think they'll be more of a basic type. You know, the first one would be, did you ignore the pandemic during the excitement following the earthquake? Immediately after the earthquake, were you and the population in general pretty much ignored the things that we should be doing, like the face coverings and social separation, things of this nature? What was your impression? Either, Ninad.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Bruce. I can, yeah. So I can say my perspective, because just to give some reference, at that time, just immediately after the earthquake happened, so Josip went to the headquarters, which is like a bunker, where he coordinated all the activities and kind of put together the team that went through the city and kind of did all these work. So he was, you know, heavily involved in all of these, and essentially not sleeping at all for a number of days. When I at that time, I had just recently arrived from abroad to Croatia, and just as you know, the situation with COVID was developing, I just had to go into self-isolation, because that was the regulations. If you travel from abroad, you go into self-isolation. So the earthquake happened, and I was at that time, you know, supposed to be in self-isolation. But naturally, of course, you have to leave the house. So that's one aspect of this earthquake or kind of the earthquakes in general and kind of the pandemics, or going back to the the emotional aspect of hazards that people go through, is that kind of emotionally you want to come together and be close to each other when times are difficult, but at the same time, given the circumstances, you need to maintain distance and kind of put logic in between. So there's competing interests. Naturally, I did leave the house. Officially, I didn't help immediately with the earthquake evaluation efforts. I did that locally for friends, which did get me in trouble with the law enforcement, but that was all fine. To give them credit, it was the police kind of was acting rationally globally, so that's great, and they were instructed not to act like super strict on people. But I would feel that people really did kind of have this in the back of their mind that the pandemic is going on, so you do need to maintain distance. And when we were outside, people were not clustering in groups; they were staying separate. And so, but coming to, to ignore the thing, of course you ignore it. You need to, there's pressing matters that you have to attend to, taking care of family members that are older and might get trapped in, URMs and similar things. So you naturally have to take measures in order to ensure their safety, which was, difficult. There's challenges to overcome, but I would feel that the entire engineering community that really stepped up really did this selflessly and kind of in the effort of helping people and providing, they did more than just building evaluations. They were more also like psychologists, because people were, okay, to be fair, the event was small, like magnitude 5.5, and the damage honestly is so to speak cosmetic. There was casualties, which is tragic, but in the global scheme of things, this is small, type of damage that you can observe, but nevertheless has a huge impact on usability of those buildings, and kind of also the psychological effect on people, where you're already psychologically stressed because of the pandemic, which is something completely no one ever that's alive on the planet has gone through before. And immediately after that, like an earthquake strikes, which didn't strike in the last 140 years. And so when we were immediately after the earthquake, I was driving around the city with my wife and child. We were trying to get to our my in-laws, and you could see people with, because there was like small aftershocks, and you really could see profound stress on people, and really a huge level of really despair. People were really crying because the earth was shaking, but effectively this was moderate shaking, and this is something that is kind of unique about this, because you have these compounding effects one another. But the whole engineering community then stepped up, did building evaluations, and provided comfort for people, just to comfort them and say, yes, this is going to be okay, and what they should do and all of that. So there was more, as Josip said, even though like the system wasn't prepared, I feel this doesn't mean that the system did not respond properly or even above what you could expect for that level of preparation, and even if it was prepared. So everyone you really grouped efficiently, and did a tremendous job in terms of helping people. This is what it's all about. So the first responders were there. You saw one of the troubling images is that the biggest maternity clinic in Zagreb, which is the main hospital where babies are born, had to be evacuated immediately after the earthquake. And so you would see women that either are just gonna give birth or just recently had their baby, they had to walk out in the cold. It's also started snowing that day, and the babies were evacuated. And this is something that's deeply troubling again, a huge burden on all of our shoulders. And so this is something that, you know, should at least, you know, be in people's mind and kind of when thinking about future and kind of how do we move forward in a more resilient way.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
so everyone, I think, ignored it, but kept it in the back of their mind. Yeah.
Okay, great. Final question, our time is running short. I would like for you just to describe key lasting impressions you have about the earthquake and its aftermath. In other words, you experienced that earthquake. What are some of the key impressions you can share with us? Either.
Okay, I will try this. Okay, like I said the last slide, this honor and respect of civil engineer, structural engineer in that period was very special to me. And I was, like Snell said, in this bunker and receiving them first 2 days, and they are coming late at night, about midnight in this room, and they couldn't find the door. They are so tired, but so proud to do that job and to help our citizens. And that was something I really remember with pride from that period.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I echo again. Yeah. So as Josip said, you know, it was, at that time it was sexy to be a structural engineer or an earthquake engineer, but you know, like a day before the earthquake, no one even was thinking about earthquakes in Croatia. But also, I think, you know, the unique aspect of the whole situation is that I like really maps that Vitor and Nicole showed, because you know, when you think about earthquakes and you look at the world map, typically see, oh, there's one location where this happened, and you're talking about the local population that's affected. But with this, you know, it just in a way levels out the playing field because we're all in this together, and there's this you know, sense of empathy that you typically cannot get unless people profoundly feel it themselves, which is happening here. So this is a huge opportunity for you know, human race to kind of find what is the good way to move forward, but also locally this was reflected in just you know, I would say, you know, ordinary people doing extraordinary things and helping their communities go through the difficult times.
Excellent. I would like to thank both of you for a very informative panel. Now, what I would like to do is turn control of the meeting over to our second moderator, Rob. Rob will go through and pose questions to our panelists, both panels, with regard to questions that he received from the audience. Rob, please continue.
Great, thanks, Bruce. And if we can maybe even have all the panelists visible here, so we can just have a conversation. And we're looking for questions from the audience. I have one here, but this is your chance. But we have lots we can discuss. So first, I want to say this was really really great, and I love the way these the two of these fit together. And I think they really they highlight the issue here, which is that certainly we're always thinking about earthquake preparedness, response, and so on. And all of us around the world now have been thinking about constantly about the issues of COVID and how to prepare and how to react. And what this highlights is the various ways in which those two things, each one complicates the other. Each one of these things is a very complicated set of actions and ways of thinking about things. The pandemic makes the seismic safety world more complicated, and earthquakes make the COVID world more complicated. And I think some of the ways that they highlighted here was that with Vitor and Nicole, that the earthquakes can cause an increase in infections. And actually, I thought another really interesting aspect of their presentation was pointing out that historically earthquakes actually can trigger disease outbreaks, and I thought those were really good examples. And then I think Josip and Nenad pointed out, just a lot of extra issues that COVID provides after just the fact that it exists at the time after earthquakes. That we know about challenges for shelters, challenges for responders. I thought it was useful observation that it's hard to get experienced inspectors to be able to get out in these circumstances. It's probably hard to get other types of assistance. And then, the concern, which fortunately turned out not to be an issue here, that once you get inspectors out, they could actually become vectors of the disease. And so that was a legitimate concern that they talked about here. So I've got a few questions here. Let's see. Let me ask for Nicole and Vitor. One thing that really struck me in looking at the projections that you had, where you were sort of looking at, well, I think it was injury, maybe it's fatalities, but you could look at injuries as well or you could look at sort of hospitalization needs from both earthquakes and from COVID. And I was wondering whether you've thought of doing that or tried to do it, because obviously one of the things that driving all of our COVID response is the issue of hospital capacity, and one of the reasons for doing the kind of projections that you do for seismic safety in general is to be able to look at hospital capacity and to be able to make a case for strengthening hospitals. And as we saw in the Zagreb case, there was an issue in one of the hospitals. And so it seems like it could be, this would be sort of an interesting aspect of your modeling, to be able to look at the capacity of hospitals to handle both of those things at the same time. Is that something that you've done or thought of doing?
Okay, maybe I'll go first. I was trying to see if Nicole would step in. Thank you for the question, Rob. Indeed, quite interesting. We did estimate it basically. The not just the percentage of the population that would be displaced, but also the percentage of the population that would be killed, and also as a fraction of the killed, or as a proportion of the killed, also the injured. Because the injured are also likely to be more exposed, right? Because again, they're going to be confined in probably relatively small spaces at the hospital. And we've seen, for example, in Italy, in the north, that there was some outbreaks of the disease in the north. So those are definitely variables that we have to take into account. I have to say, however, that as we were doing this study, a lot of times I felt like, oh, we're being too optimistic and pessimistic in some of the assumptions. For example, one of the things is that we just assumed that the hospitals would remain functional after an earthquake like this. I can tell you that the biggest earthquake the biggest hospital in Portugal, which is located in Lisbon, is quite old. We have various hospitals which are basically unreinforced masonry in some of the places in Lisbon and elsewhere in the country. So I think it is also unrealistic for us to believe that after such a strong event, that the capacity of those hospitals would remain like that. And there's actually a few interesting studies on Earthquake Spectra, on EERI Earthquake Spectra, if I'm not mistaken, for Peru, about how the capacity of the hospitals can reduce after earthquakes. So that's definitely something that we have to bring into the equation, but we did not do that yet.
Good, thanks. Okay, so a question we have here is, it would be great, this is again for Vitor and Nicole, it'd be great if you can share with us more details about the Turkish earthquake, if you have any.
Yeah, so I mean, the situation's still unfolding, and it's not necessarily easy to disaggregate with the data that comes in what infections are from just what the state of COVID would have been without an earthquake versus with. I want to say the cases have nearly doubled since the event, but throughout Europe, the cases have been increasing quite a lot. So it's hard to, at this stage, fully delineate that. I think it's something to keep an eye on and see, and also for other places to potentially learn from in the response. But Vitor, I don't know if you have anything to add for Turkey specifically.
Maybe just very quickly, Rob, you know, earthquakes are not that special when it comes to impact in pandemics. And I just wanted to very briefly mention two examples. For example, the category 5 Amphan cyclone that hit the west of India. Basically, once again, a lot of people had to be put in shelters, and the infection rate doubled in the west of India and also in Bangladesh. And also the same thing was witnessed in Beirut after the explosion in Lebanon. There are several, I think it's actually an article in the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken, but also in a few other places, that the infection rate increased 220% in the 2 weeks after the explosion in Beirut. So once again, showing that there's a collapse of the safety measures, and also that the hospitals are not being able to cope with both the injured and the infected.
Good, and that leads to, there's a question here I have for Ninad and Josep, is if you're aware of any studies correlating the occurrence of the earthquake and the number of COVID cases.
Okay, I am not familiar with any study yet. We are still in a huge COVID crisis in Zagreb, and I contact several epidemiologists, but they are in real problem with time. And Vitor asked us about some data during this article, and we are collapsed in that time. And I'm not familiar with any data, but I can tell about the hospitals. When we made damage assessment hospitals, there was really the most complicated decisions, because you have many aftershocks and we had many damages on that building because they are very old, over 150 years. And it's a very problematic decision to detach somebody from the bed or something, or from doctors, and close the hospital. And many decisions about hospitals were problematic, and we rather to choose a lower level of mark than to make it unusable. And that's a really problem, because especially related to that problem of experienced engineer. They were afraid to go on the field.
Good, thanks. Here's a question for everybody. General question, whether pandemic response and earthquake response planning is integrated in Croatia in particular, and in Europe in general. Because, you know, here, you know, are some of the problems, you know, because of poor coordination between these two things. Maybe they're run through different agencies and different organizations and different professional groups.
Rob, I can just mention that probably the only case that I'm aware where that has been coordinated is in Italy. In fact, one of the reasons we got the idea of doing this study was precisely because one of our colleagues is one of the directors of the Italian Civil Protection, and he told us specifically that basically he got the request to prepare for emergency plans for both earthquakes and floods during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm aware that this is being done in Italy. I'm not sure elsewhere if the same thing is being followed.
Okay. Here's a question. I guess, well, this could be for another speculative one for Vitor and Nicole, asking about maybe if you've thought of estimating the probability of an earthquake and a pandemic occurring simultaneously in the future.
I have not. I think, the mathematics must be extremely complicated. They were already complicated just assuming a single event and then also doing the probabilistic hazard maps and risks that that Nicole presented. I think is one of those things that I want to believe that basically having this outbreak of a pandemic, it's rare. We've seen one more or less 100 years ago, and maybe smaller events with the Ebola case and some of the SARS in the Middle East. So I think it's relatively rare, at least at the scale that we're seeing the COVID-19. But I have to say, however, that once you reach this stage of having a global pandemic, I think having a destructive event during a global pandemic, it's extremely high. I mean, can we say that basically during a year, we're not going to have a destructive event anywhere in the world? Or can we say that we're not going to have cyclones or floods? We've seen now in the United States with the wildfires and both the cyclones during this pandemic.
Yeah, it's a good point. So if you assume a pandemic is a longer lasting kind of a thing, and so there's a longer time period, and it's likely that an earthquake is going to occur someplace during that time period. And so far, our experience seems to be that we have a large global pandemic exactly every 100 years, is based on our small data set here. Let's see, we've got a few other minutes. Let me switch over to, I'm trying to sort through several different questions here. Fine. So again, for Vitor and Nicole, has your study, was there interaction with the Portuguese government? Has this in any ways affected government policy to heighten preparedness and so on?
So while we were doing this study, yes, I did reach out to a few people here in Portugal, and I was actually on the national TV talking a little bit about this. But I think I probably scared the journalist a little bit because he kept telling me, things are already bad even without an earthquake. If there's an earthquake, I think people are not going to like it. So I talk about that, and I know that it's on their, if I'm not mistaken, it's on their streaming platform, some of these things. I also reached out to the Civil Protection because we've been working with them in some smaller projects in the past. But I have to say, Rob, that I was probably not very successful in trying to communicate these complex results to a non-academic audience. I basically sent the paper from Spectra and said, oh, here, take a look at the results. Things are bad. And probably we have to work a little bit more in communicating in a better way. For example, I think the maps that Nicole was showing at the end from the New York Times, it's relatively easy for you to connect to those maps because of those simple statistics. I don't think we did that for this particular study, and it's definitely something that should have been done. I got contacted then by a few organizations and even sometimes just people that were interested. So there was some impact in the country, but I think probably didn't reach as far as we wanted to. But I will also say that I think the Civil Protection is basically so overwhelmed right now dealing with the pandemic that I almost do not blame them for not taking action after seeing the study that I shared with them.
Thanks. Let's see. So for Ninad and Joseph, so you had talked about how the presence of COVID in the community, inhibited inspections. So now repairs are going on, and I'm wondering to what extent you think they've inhibited the process of repairs, or maybe as Joseph pointed out, people are seem to be ignoring it these days. I don't know, just any comments about how it might, how are repairs going, and have they been affected in any ways by the continuing presence of COVID?
Okay, I can try to answer. Reconstruction is not going. We are preparing some funds for it, and in Croatia it lasts a long time. And I don't know the answer to that question because very few buildings were reconstructed till now. But I can refer to previous question. We have some media campaign in Croatia, also on national TV, after Albania earthquake last year, and we were talking about earthquakes preparedness and everything else. And when pandemic came to Croatia, we talking with some government politicians, and we said, and now you were not ready without pandemic, now you got earthquake in pandemic, and they called us witches in Croatia. But it was a joke, but a bad one.
Yeah. It occurs to me in terms of the question that I just asked. We can also think about the effects of COVID on reconstruction issues and earthquakes that occurred before the pandemic. And I was just thinking another EERI Learning from Earthquakes project that I have been involved in, where we went almost exactly a year ago to Palu, Indonesia, and we were, in the process of preparing that, and we gave our webinar on that after, earlier this year after COVID had already started, and there, they were facing all the usual challenges of not just responding to the earthquake, but just all of the long-term reconstruction issues, and then COVID hit, and it's definitely impeded the process in so many ways, because the attention of the country has been pointed in different directions, and it's exacerbated the existing problems that they had in temporary housing were not great places to be anyhow, and the existence of COVID has exacerbated those problems, and it's just generally made their lives more miserable, and it's absolutely slowed down just all the process of all the assistance they need for reconstruction. So anyway, that's just another aspect is we're sort of thinking about earthquakes that occur after the pandemic begins, but there's a case of the pandemic occurring after the earthquake, and again, there's some very serious interactive effects. Anyway, so I have a question here for Nicole and Vitor. Sort of thinking back to this taking it to reflect on California, do you think some of the data from wildfire evacuation during COVID might serve as a useful data to help to calibrate some of your assumptions?
Yeah, so I let Vitor take the Europe questions and I'll take the California ones. But yeah, absolutely. When Vitor was presenting, there was an assumption, the optimistic or the pessimistic case in terms of spread. And that has a lot to do with how much people might be mixing, how infectious the disease is, et cetera. And I think looking back to the wildfires, because California has county level data, we can, at a more refined scale, look at what the actual reproduction number or the R factor was during that time. And that can help us calibrate for the potential of different scenarios around the world, since that was a big assumption in our study. Equally, we could look at other natural hazards that have recently occurred, and if the data is available, try and calibrate that number as well.
Good, thanks. Here is
sorry, can I make a quick comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, talking about data, I just need to make a plug, and again, just acknowledge the huge amount of work that the local engineers did in Croatia. And one of the results of that is that they've gathered all the building evaluation data, and that's populated in a database which is available, which is a huge resource, both for research purposes and kind of strategic planning purposes. So I think one of the this is just wishful thinking for the future, is just the open data and kind of this type of stuff to have available, I think is great. And also the other part of this pandemic that presents a unique opportunity is that due to the evolving nature of that process, these different hazards occur in different stages of the pandemic in different places in the world. So you can learn from all these things as well. But also, I just want to say, talking about how the earthquake affects. There was a question about having vaccination and kind of as the population is going to get the disease immediately or not. It might also turn out to look at the case of what if it's a flu season and an earthquake happens. So how does that affect these things? Because maybe in a couple of years, this will be the situation with this disease, hopefully sooner. But this was just a like a tangential comment. But anyway, thanks.
Good, thank you. So here's a Croatia question. So in Zagreb, or even in Croatia more widely, is there ongoing effort to retrofit hospitals? Given that they're, as we noticed, they're doubly critical to cope with the pandemic, and then of course with earthquakes. They're particularly critical. So are there ongoing efforts, or maybe there are now efforts to strengthen hospitals? Anyway, give us if you could respond to that.
I can try. We had also huge campaign before earthquake about that. That was our top priority, to reconstruct our hospitals, because it was maybe some stronger earthquake. Our hospital doesn't have any capacities, and also they are very vulnerable to earthquakes. And huge debate came out because we have one hospital outside of the city who was building just before our 1990s, I know, and it was stopped. It was huge hospital, relatively new and not so vulnerable like these old ones. And now there's a question to move all these hospitals from all part of the city to this relatively new one. But we had problem with doctors because they are all by the flats around these hospitals, and they don't want to go outside of the city. And that was, I don't know how it will be solved, because money for the World Bank or some funds won't go to the reconstruct these old buildings. They couldn't be reconstructed to the new standards.
And I have one additional just comment on things going wrong. What happened recently in Croatia, so there was pandemic going on, earthquake. What happened recently is also like this is not an ad, but one of the major like digital infrastructure providers for internet, phone, mobile services and all that, their servers went down. So the whole day you were not able to use your phone, like so fixed lines, mobile phones, anything. So everything was offline. So you can imagine, because we're speaking now due to the possibilities afforded by digital technology. If this is the key for first responders and all of that. So if this also happens, I mean, it seems like a lot of low probability events happened in Croatia recently. But that's also one of considerations in terms of critical infrastructures, data centers, and kind of just everything that's providing this key resource for communication, which is crucial in general, but especially in the times like we're discussing here. So
yeah, no, that's a good point. I was just reflecting on that comment on the hospital, the new hospital out of town. Again, we tend to sort of focus on the issue of the moment, so it seems like that's a good idea to do that. certainly for an earthquake. But you know, not just the doctors, but in normal times, you want to have the hospital close to where people are because they have all their other diseases. And you know, and again, if we're thinking about earthquakes and pandemics, we're thinking about those injuries and illnesses. But everything else is going on. So I, appreciated your picture of the women's hospital, because in the middle of all of these things, earthquakes, pandemics, everything, there are normal medical issues, and giving birth is the most significant of those. And so we need to be able to integrate thinking about all of those things. Anyway, we're kind of at the end of our time here, and this has really been terrific. Great presentations, great panelists, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bruce. I'm sorry, to Dana, I think is going to wrap up here. But thank you, Bruce. Bruce was responsible for organizing all of this, so I thank Bruce very much for putting this together. So Dana.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to all the panelists. I feel like this is the year where I am stumped and I never know exactly what to say. And my brain is just not working in the same way during a pandemic. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate the level of complexity that you all brought to this, and especially talking about things like the emotional aspect of just piling disaster upon disaster. That's definitely something that I've thought about a lot this year. I was also sort of struck by how interrelated these two can be, but also how different. Natural disasters are really not politicized the same way that something like a global pandemic is. So I loved the comment that that the structural engineers became sexy because they were stepping in and helping out. But then I thought, well, why can't we make wearing masks sexy too? Because it's what we do in a pandemic to help our society. There you go. To help society and really stem the spread of this pandemic. And it also just struck by the fact that the pandemic, look at the global numbers of fatalities we've seen. It's way higher than an earthquake would be, even hundreds of years of earthquake. And the economic consequences also have been extremely high. So how do we take what we know about how things are interconnected, but also the way that we know that psychologically and politically people are responding really differently to these different types of disasters. And then of course you throw in things like wildfires and hurricanes and whatever else you might have. And it really adds up quite a bit of complexity to a field that we're all in that was already quite complex. So we all have our work cut out for us. We don't know what the future brings. We know it's going to be more complex and wilder than we thought. And this pandemic and all the life and nature occurring in the meantime is really just reminding us of that. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. This is really fantastic. And thanks to everyone who attended as well. I know all of you out there are doing good work, and you are all superheroes to me with the work that you're doing. So let's just keep on keeping on, and really appreciate the forum for this conversation. So thanks to you all. Bruce, did you want to wrap up at all, or are we? Oh, or Vita? I'm not running the webinar. So
okay. So I'm unmuting. I think it's appropriate for EERI, Vita, maybe to give a close to this. In other words, like, I think there'll be a video available. I believe we're going to send out a survey so we can see what it is we can improve when we do future ones. Vita, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Bruce.
It might be appropriate for you to make some comments on that, because I have no other points. Dana wrapped up things very nicely.
Sure. Yeah. So Maggie is, I believe, sharing her screen at the moment. So you can see that we will share PDH links with you tomorrow, 24 hours after the webinar. And you should also receive the recordings of the webinar. You can learn more about the EERI organization on our website. You can also join. And when you do join, we urge you to also join one of our chapters, either Northern California or whichever one is closer to you. If you're a student from Europe, you also have to check out our SLC website, and we have quite a few nice programs for students as well. You can also join us for getting more news from the Pulse, which is our newsletter. And we also want to thank all of you who joined us today from various locations in the world on this great webinar. And thank you. This is it. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
And
Bye.
thank you, Vita. Thank you, National, for the tech support. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
No problem. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.